Page 207 of The Unfolding is the story of Tracie Miles.
All of his negative thoughts, worst case scenarios, that is what was just keeping me stuck in this pit. God, just please show me what is keeping me from moving forward. What came to mind was fear. I was just in this perpetual state of fear.
God's story has been unfolding.
Since the beginning of time.
He invites you to be a part of it.
Another page in The Unfolding.
Hi, this is Meredith Foster. When Tracie Miles' marriage of 25 years imploded, it felt like the train of life had slammed into a brick wall. Almost overnight, she went from financially stable to desperately broke, from a family of 5 to a single mom of 3. Now, almost a decade later, Tracie describes that season as a lifequake, an earthquake that shakes and changes every part of your life. She became stuck. She was overwhelmed by countless fears. There seemed to be no way to move forward, no hope that she could ever feel joy again. Have you ever felt that way? Tracie couldn't imagine how God was going to make beauty from these ashes. Today, Tracie helps others overcome struggles, reclaim their lives, and share their stories. She's a best-selling author, director of COMPEL Pro Writers Training at Proverbs 31 Ministries, and she's the founder of the Living Unbroken Divorce Recovery program.
I grew up in a family that went to church, and we made that a priority. But in my own heart, I'm not sure that I always quite understood everything that we were being taught, but we went through all of, the normal procedures. I went off to college and, like many college students, didn't always make the best choices. And one of the mistakes that I made in college was finding someone that I was interested in, and then ended up getting pregnant accidentally at the age of 19. That kind of catapulted me to where I am today. So it's a long journey that God has had me on this whole time. I ended up ending that pregnancy at that time. And so I spent many years on into my 30s really feeling unworthy and unforgivable and just so ashamed of that choice that I had made. There's so many women that I have mentored and counseled over the years. God had called me to work in a pregnancy-related clinic for a while, volunteering, just trying to encourage people to value life. That is really the first thing that I feel like God did in my healing process, is for me to begin speaking truth into other people's lives, that He does forgive, because I had an epiphany of my own in a conference when I was in my 30s. I went to a women's conference, which I had never even attended one before, but I was serving in ministry at my church because I just felt like that was something that I could do. And the church paid for me to go to this conference. And in that conference, God literally just changed my life at that conference. And I specifically heard Him tell me, go and share. It was those 3 words, actually, as if it was announced over the loudspeaker in the church, to where I was startled. And I looked up because we were in a time of prayer. And I was like, well, that's odd. What is that? But everyone else is still silently praying. So I just felt it just reverberate in my spirit.
Had you ever experienced anything like that before?
No.
Wow.
I mean, I had studied my Bible. I did Bible studies. I was involved in my church, but this was, and I sat straight up in my chair and started crying experience. And I had never had that before. And so I kept thinking about it and pondering about it, like, what is God calling me to go and share? And then it just kind of hit me, oh, He wants me to go and share that story about what happened to me in college. Of course, you can guess what my answer was.
I'm going to guess you said, no, thank you.
I said, no, thanks for thinking of me. Never told anyone ever about that situation. It's a secret I had kept all those years into my 30s, even after having children of my own and, being married. I just kind of decided, I can't do that, Lord. That's too much to ask. So that's really when I started serving in women's ministry, started being the director of our women's ministry and running that program, and loved it. And then I went to another conference, and it's called the She Speaks Conference. And I've now been going to those conferences and working at them for 20 years. That year I was an attendee, and God just solidified, you are forgiven. We had this ceremony where you would take a note card and write down that unforgivable sin that you felt was just this black mark on your whole existence that God could not overlook. And we physically nailed it to wooden crosses in the front of the room.
Wow.
I've never been the same since then. After that conference, I had been working a corporate job for like 7 years in a Big Four accounting firm, which was stressing me to an unhealthy level. And I knew that there was just something else. Something was missing in my life. And that conference just gave me the courage to say yes to God for the very first time. It equipped me. It was a speakers and writers conference, and I wasn't a speaker, wasn't a writer. I really just went because I was in women's ministry, and they had a women's ministry track at the time. I just began kind of dabbling in that. I decided I need to leave this corporate job and just expect God to provide, which he did, and kind of work out all those scary finances. I had 3 little children. I just began building a website and began working on some speaking topics. And then I made this huge list of churches. This is old school now. Went through the yellow pages and made this list of churches. And I just randomly mailed out this brochure of speaking topics. Who am I? I'm nobody. It got like this 30% response rate, which is so far out of the norm. But I started doing all of this speaking, and then I wanted to apply to the Proverbs 31 speaker team, and that took 6 or 8 months to get involved in that team. And from there, God has just opened a lot of doors. And I got my first book contract. I started writing that. It was called Stress Less Living. Had another book after that called Your Life Still Counts, and that was really where I shared the abortion story and how God uses even the worst things in our life, just that pain for a purpose.
Was that the first time that you shared that story? When did you begin to do what God was asking you and talk about that?
In my speaking engagements. I remember the very first one. These are just smaller churches, that I could drive to. And then over the years, it evolved into, I was traveling all over the country, speaking about all kinds of different things. But I remember the very first one, and it was pouring down rain. And I drove over there. It was just across town. And I sat in my car for probably 30 or 40 minutes and just cried, terrified. Why did I say I would do this? What was I thinking? Just a life-changing experience, because after I shared that story and God just kind of took over, the Holy Spirit took over once I got on stage, and it was very vulnerable, and it was just everything I've stepped out of my comfort zone to do, I feel like is one of the healing stitches that God has put in my heart. All these women afterwards came up after the event and just said, thank you for sharing, and me too. And it was a moving experience, and it just confirmed in my heart that God can use all things. We read that in the Bible, but do we really believe that? We tend to think, well, why did you let that happen to me, Lord? Why'd you let me make that bad decision? Why'd you make me live through this pain? But then when you can see him actually turning it around and making beauty from those ashes, it gives you that confidence and that excitement. I want to do that again. I want to use that experience again. The pivotal point is when I had been married for 25 years. We had just had our 25-year anniversary, and this was about less than 10 years ago. I found out a lot of things that ended up leading to divorce that were irreconcilable, just infidelity and financial issues and addictions and all kinds of things, like a secret life that had been happening. And of course, that's one thing I talk about in my new book, which is called God's Got You, is just life quakes. That's a life quake. Basically, an earthquake hit my life. And a life quake can be anything, something good, or, just a transition season you're going through, or it can be something that just rips your feet out from under you.
One of the things that you just said is that you've learned that every time you step out of your comfort zone, that's been a part of your healing, confirming that God can use everything. And even when you're asking that question, God, why would you let me live through that? And yet he brings beauty out of ashes. So you know that, but now you're walking into what had to have been one of the most difficult experiences of your adult life. Can you describe where you were at spiritually when that unfolded and when you began to realize what was going on and how you walked through that?
Well, this did not happen overnight. We'd been having many, many problems. I was very, very devoted to my faith. My children were in church every time the door opened, and that was a huge part of our life. My ex-husband was actually a deacon in our church. So I was in a great place with the Lord. When that happened, I was still in a great place with the Lord, but I was in a different place. I was more in the place of, where were you? Why didn't you listen to my prayers? I'm actually kind of mad. I'm mad at you. I'm mad at, this situation. And I tried for so long to resolve it, to reconcile, to make things right. It takes 2 people to make these changes happen. And that just wasn't in the cards for us. But I did go through many, many months of just extreme grief. And one of the ways that I've described it before, and all of the books, the last 4 books I've written kind of have stemmed out of this experience, was you're grieving the living. You're grieving the loss of the living, because it's the loss of the person that you loved. They didn't die, but they're still not here. And you're grieving the life that you knew, the friends that you had, the church family, your Sunday school class, the dynamics, your financial stability, knowing who you were. I'm not a wife anymore. Now what am I? An identity crisis. So just all of those things. And I probably spent 6 or 8 months where there was not a day that went by that I couldn't stop crying. Just the heartache of my children and carrying that burden, and didn't feel strong. But in hindsight, God gave me more strength than I ever thought would have been possible.
It sounds like your life changed in every way.
Everything changed basically overnight, because once I found out and got physical proof, all these things have been happening. I was like, okay, I'm no longer an enabler, and this has got to end. And so everything changed. I had been speaking and writing. God had called me to it. I loved it. But it certainly wasn't a full-time income. And I had left my corporate job years ago and a really big salary to follow this call that I felt God had on my life. And so that was an adjustment just from a financial standpoint, because he kind of walked away and me and the children were just on our own, abandoned with no financial support whatsoever. So just working through all of those financial fears and just terrified of what was going to happen. My house was actually going into foreclosure. I was trying to find a job, but couldn't. Just seeing how God provided so much. But the day did come where I finally got to the point to where I'm like, I am just real tired of being miserable and sad. And I can't change this situation. And I can't change the other person. All I can do is change myself and my attitude and my outlook and pick myself up off the floor and take it day by day.
What were the rhythms of life or resources? What were the things that helped carry you through? Obviously, it was God and your relationship with him, but do you remember what were kind of the practical things that kept you afloat spiritually, emotionally, mentally? That's just such a radical change of everything that's been your support.
I did leave my church, not because I didn't love my church and not because the people in my church didn't love me, but we've been going to the same Sunday school class for 20 years. So I can't go in there now and sit there as a single person, with everybody has all these questions. And also people are sympathetic and empathetic and they say things and you're just, it's hard to even invite that kind of love because you're emotionally unstable. So I did walk away from that. So really everything was just in solace for the most part. You have friends walk away because they don't know what to say or they're picking sides, and it's just such a hard situation. So really, my children were amazing. They were in their late teenage years and into college. And so I probably depended on them more than I should have, but we all supported each other and I couldn't have made it through without them. But another big thing I did was I still stayed in my Bible, even though I was mad at God. There were times that I'm like, I am not reading that book because I don't like what to happen right now. And I think that's very natural. And I do talk about that in the book that I wrote. It's called Living Unbroken. And it's specifically for women. And I have a lot of men that read it too, but it's kind of written in a woman's tone, how to get through divorce, how to live unbroken and just reclaim your life and reclaim your heart and not have to live like that. But I journaled a lot. So I'd never been a journaler. I've been to dozens of Bible studies where I kept all kinds of notes and scribbles and all the things. But as far as just journaling, that's not something that I had done. So I began keeping this digital journal because I'm a writer. So I type everything. I barely use a pencil anymore. And I journaled, I think there's 150,000 words now in that document, just everything that happened. It became this outlet that I could use to just spill everything that I couldn't tell other people, or that I was ashamed to tell other people, or that I was ashamed to even admit to myself or admit to God, but I would pour it out in this journal. Looking back in that journal, I can see God's fingerprints all over it because I see in sequential form over like 2 years, prayers that I would have forgotten, little miracles that he did, checks that came in the mail that were just completely out of the blue from something that might have happened 5 years earlier that got overpaid and I got a refund, or somebody would send something, just amazing things that would happen, and just the healing process. And it also helped me see my areas of struggle. Like one of the things that I share about in one of my books, because right before I got separated, I had received a new 2-book contract from my publisher. So now I'm thinking, I can't do ministry. I can't encourage anyone. I don't have anything happy to say. And now I'm going to have this scarlet letter on my chest, and it's going to be so terrible. But I've had 4 books now birthed out of that experience, each one with a different topic. But the first one was Unsinkable Faith. And it's all about transforming your thoughts, because the way we think drives our emotions, and our emotions drive our actions, and our actions are how we live out our everyday life. That book was a healing process. I had to pivot completely on how I was looking at the whole situation.
Did that come out of your journaling? Being transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's a scripture that we're familiar with, but to live it out is a really different thing. I'd love to hear, experientially, what that was like for you in learning to transform your thoughts. Because we so need to hear that. We need it so much.
Right. Well, the first book, I wrote the book, and it was, a whole book, like 12 chapters. And it's the only thing I've ever written. And I have 8 books now. Actually, would have had 9 had that one come out, but I'm glad it didn't. But my publisher was like, yeah, this is just not hitting the mark. Because sometimes, somehow I had gotten the words on paper and the thoughts and the stories, but it just wasn't hitting the mark. And so I had to go back to the drawing table. And of course, that was like a huge blow, not only to my self-esteem, but just like, I can't do this. This is ridiculous. So to your point, I went back to that journal and I started reading back through it. And what I noticed was patterns of thinking. All of these negative thoughts, all of this woe is me, worst case scenarios, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. That is what was just keeping me stuck in this mud of my life, not being able to dig out of this pit. And then one day specifically, I was praying and I asked God, I said, just please show me what is keeping me from moving forward. And what came to mind was fear. You're afraid. So I started writing down my fears. Like, what am I afraid of? 33 things I wrote down probably in 2 minutes.
Can you remember what was on that list?
Finances, my emotions, my children, my work. I wrote this whole story in Unsinkable Faith about this revelation that I had where God said, look at all the things you're afraid of. That's why you can't be happy when you're living in this state of terror. And there were a lot of terrible things that were happening, especially legal things and illegal things that my ex had been involved in that were affecting me that I had no control over, and just so many things. And it felt like every other day there was just a new shoe dropping. I was just in this perpetual state of fear. Like I get one thing, okay, great. I made it over this hump. And then next day there would be something that would just pull the rug out from under me. And it just was just constant.
Maybe you've been there. Maybe you are there, feeling like every day is a battle with fear. Interestingly, God was going to use the very place where Tracie had written about her fears to help her change her thoughts and change her life.
I could either keep living like that, or I could just look back and see in my journal, okay, well, God took care of that and this and this and that time and this time. And it helped me to start building my faith back up that, yeah, this horrible thing happened, but God didn't leave me throughout that whole season. That's where the journal really came in handy, and it started helping me see these patterns of thinking. So I just became obsessed, literally, with learning about, okay, what does that mean to transform your thoughts, to give your thoughts to God, to capture your thoughts? That's what that particular book is all about. You change your thoughts and you're going to change your life. We can pray for God to help us overcome and help us heal or whatever, but you have to take steps and do things. You have to believe, but you also have to have courage and bravery and let him help you start having the self-confidence to do the things that you need to do.
So that journal was really powerful and really instrumental in the process to have the faith that whatever is going to come up, he's going to walk you through it. What happened from there?
From there, that's actually one of my most popular books. From that point forward is where I kind of starting to reclaim my life and thinking, well, obviously divorce will always be my story, part of my story, but it's not who I am. It's just something that happened. And I wanted to love my life again. And I wanted to, okay, that chapter in my life has ended. I did these things, these 10 things. I was this person then. Who am I going to be now? And that's what I was faced with, that identity crisis that I mentioned. So I started writing another book because now my heart had kind of shifted towards, okay, God has gotten me through this. I'm a different person. And he just gave me such passion to help other women who are feeling that way to also understand they too, regardless of what your situation is, it may not be divorce. It could be something more horrific. It could be a tragedy. It could just be a smaller situation that has uprooted your life and now you don't know where to go next. You don't know how to love your life again. Maybe you've just gotten older and you're in a different season of life. You're in transition period. So I just started thinking about this topic of love life again. And so that was the name of the next book. It's called Love Life Again, Finding Joy When Life is Hard. And so my heart in that book was, here's how to move forward. Here's how to start loving your life, even if your life is not what you wanted it to be, or to start embracing your circumstances, even if they're not the ones that you wanted, because there's still good things in life, even if it's not the life that we thought we would live. Because the life that I envisioned for the rest of my life when I got married and started having kids is definitely not the life that I had. So I had to, number one, accept that, and then embrace, what am I going to do next? And how can I still love my life? And so there's a lot of things that I started doing to just embrace that concept of loving my life again. As I was writing that book, God was showing me and walking me through the journey. All of my books, which I always tell people, I'm walking out the journey. I never write a book like, this happened, I overcame, I triumphed, I did great, and now let me tell you what to do. That is not how any of my books are. They are all me walking the journey and sharing it as I'm learning it and the stories that are happening. But also my focal point is, what is the reader going to take away from it? Everybody has a story. So nobody just wants to sit around and read Tracie's story. So my focus is, how can I use my story to equip someone else to make changes in their own life? And that's really where my heart is. So the unsinkable faith, and then the love life again. And then at that point, I started thinking, okay, God's done so much. And I see now that you can not only, not to use a cliche, but you can not only survive divorce, but you can thrive after divorce, and your life can still be great. And we've still got a lot of life to live. And what are we going to do with it? And so I wanted to minister specifically to women that had gone through divorce. So that next book, which I mentioned briefly earlier, is called Living Unbroken, Reclaiming Your Life and Your Heart After Divorce. And I also did a Living Unbroken Divorce Recovery workbook, because when I first got divorced, I'm like, okay, I need to go to a support group. So I went to one. I sobbed through the whole entire thing. And it was men and women. It was very structured, very formal. I didn't feel comfortable. And I never went back, ever. So I wanted to create something that gave women a safe place to process with other women. That is where not only the book came out of, but also the recovery workbook. And so there are small groups and churches all over the nation of women that are doing the divorce recovery workbook, because it's real life. Financial tips, legal tips. This is real life stuff that everybody walks through, and just emotions and, all of those things. So I needed that book. And I think that's what God has put on my heart a lot, is if there's something that I need, I want to read, I need encouragement and advice and somebody, in the weeds advice, and I can't find it, then I feel like, okay, well, let me write it then. That's where a lot of this passion comes from. So I hope that this book, that it has just changed their life and it has helped them. And that's all God and not me. That's a blessing to me. And then this last book that released in July of 2024 is called God's Got You. And it's basically okay, girl, now you've got this, get up and go. So it's got a little bit of a different tone. I'm not talking about all this mushy, let's heal, overcome, because not that that's important. And I do have some of that mixed in there, but we've got to take action. You got to make things happen. Of course, God's leading the way, and he'll close doors and open doors as he sees fit. But if we just sit around and wish things were different, nothing's going to be different. We have to take steps and have the courage and the confidence and all the things and the accountability. And we have to actually do things to make life different, if that's what we want, whether it's start a new career ministry or overcome a bad situation. And so this book is really just to light a fire under people who are sitting around dreaming about something they think is beyond them, or wishing they could make life different, but they think there's too many obstacles. And I want them to know that you've got it in you. and God's got you in this.
When you look back and you think about particularly your relationship with God, your understanding of God and how you did life, even 15 years ago, and you think about all that you've been through, what would you say are some of the key things that are different about how you see God and understand walking out relationship with Him now?
There was a season where I felt like God was farther away when I was going through such a hard time. I still prayed, I still believed, but I just wondered, does He care? I think that's important for people to understand, that it's okay to be mad at God. And that's one of the things I write about, because that's a human emotion. I mean, we cannot, God gave us those emotions. And I always would have stigmas against certain things in society. Like there's a stigma against divorce and God hates divorce. And I really wanted to dispel those myths, because God doesn't hate us when we sin or when we make mistakes or when things happen to us. So I've learned a lot, I think, about His character, where before I felt like maybe I was in His Word, I was passionate about it, I was doing my Bible studies, I was speaking, I wanted to encourage other women, I wanted to help other women find healing, but I also, all along the way, still needed my own healing.
Now you've got this track record with God of knowing that no matter what it is you go through, He can show up, He can redeem, He can even use it not only to change you, but to help change others. What do you see ahead? Do you have a sense of what God has next for you?
Well, I have a passion for something that just came up a couple years ago. And one of the miracles that God did in the midst of trying to figure out where my life was going to go during the divorce recovery era was when I was looking for a job. As I said, I had looked and looked, applied and applied. And I was very qualified for many jobs, but nothing was ever coming through. And then I applied for a job with Proverbs 31 Ministries. It's an international ministry for women, for those that aren't familiar with it, proverbs31.org. They had a job for, it was like a new training department to help writers. It was just off the ground, didn't even exist yet. I had been on the speaker team and the writer team, but those are all volunteer basis. You don't get paid for those. Very blessed to have been a part of those, but it was not a paying job, is my point. And so I was so discouraged at not having any employment opportunities, because I needed a job desperately to provide for my family, the kids in college, keep food on the table, all the things. I got this job, and not because of my affiliation with Proverbs, but because it was just God ordained. It wasn't a special favor. I went through the same 3-month interview process as everybody else, and was finally just going to be like, okay, this is ridiculous. This is not going to happen. It's wearing me out. I'm just going to give up on it. But I actually got the job offer on my birthday. And so I thought that was a little birthday gift from God. So I always think about that. There's the little miracles that would always happen. But I work for COMPEL Pro Writers Training, which is a division of Proverbs 31. So what I've been doing for the last almost 8 years is teaching thousands of writers, 99% women, about the art of writing and publishing. And all nonfiction, telling your stories. Everyone's stories matters. That's what I think my life has evolved in right now is just recognizing that every story matters. I talk to women every day who think their story doesn't matter or it's already been told. And so we have to have that whole conversation about why your story matters. A couple years ago, God called me to start this author coaching business. And so I've been pouring a lot of energy into that, because at COMPEL Writers Training, we're a membership site, but it's compeltraining.com. It's a membership site, so it's all online learning, which is awesome. But we don't do, right now, one-on-one coaching. Let me meet with you in Zoom for however many sessions and talk about your story and your dreams. And how do we do that? And how are we going to get you from blank page to this published book? And that just invigorates me, and I love it.
I love that God has used your story in your own life as you've journaled, as you've written it down, as you've gone through the process of writing books. It's been a key instrument in your own healing. Then He uses those books to work healing in others. And now He's using you to help others know that their story can do the same thing. It's such a God thing, isn't it? It's just the way He works. If you were sitting across the table having a cup of coffee with someone who's walked through the unthinkable and feels like their life is sinking and can't imagine how their story could be redeemed, what would you say to that person?
I would tell them to try to begin thinking exactly the opposite, because that's going to be the game changer, is when you stop thinking, I can't do this can't happen, things are never going to be good again, I can't recover, I can't deal with this loss or this change. we can keep thinking that and nothing's going to change. Or we can start asking God to help us start reframing our thoughts and capture those thoughts, refuse to continue thinking the same thing, and rephrase those thoughts into something more positive. It's a simple 3-step process. Be aware, refuse to do it again, start thinking differently. Yeah, that takes practice, a lot of practice, and it takes time to develop a habit. But over time, you'll start thinking differently. You'll start seeing things differently. My mom always, she raised me with this phrase of change the things that you can, accept the things that you can't, and be wise enough to know the difference. So if we can't change our circumstances, we can change our thoughts, we can change our reactions, we can change our perspectives, and we can change our dreams and our future by thinking big, trusting God, and being willing to step out of our comfort zone when God calls us to do so.
Tracie's newest book is called God's Got You, Embracing New Beginnings with Courage and Confidence. She is the founder of the Living Unbroken Divorce Recovery program. It's a small group for women hosted in churches and homes around the country. And if you've always dreamed of writing a book, Tracie would love to help you do that. You can find out about her author coaching and more at traciemiles.com. And while you're there, sign up to receive. She's got a free ebook. It's called 10 Tips for Handling Change Well in Your New Season. I am so thankful to Tracie for sharing her story. You know, we get to share these God stories because of people like you. Thank you for listening or subscribing to the podcast, or maybe you've given a kind review. If you'd like to help this kind of storytelling grow, maybe you'd like to support the Wow God Podcast Network. Your $40 monthly gift or a gift of any size makes a difference. Just click the donate button at wowgod.com. And while you're there, check out some of our other podcasts like Praying Through Scripture with Christina Hannon. It's an invitation to dive into Scripture, pray together, and experience a deeper connection with God. Thanks to the Unfolding team, Lindsay Caparoon, Michael Shermack, our producer and network director, Jason Rackow. The Unfolding is a Wow God production, a ministry of the University of Northwestern St. Paul. Discover more at wowgod.com. We'll be back next week with another page of The Unfolding.